Good morning. This is Pastor Tim Wells, pastor of Cross of Christ Lutheran Church in Aurora, Nebraska. Everyone's getting ready for Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving will be tomorrow. Tonight we have our Thanksgiving Eve service. So I thought we'd have a little fun today. I want to share a sermon that I wrote about 4 years ago with you. In this sermon, it's not your average ordinary sermon. It's a poem. The whole sermon is a poem. It's a message that actually I've shared a few different times since the first time I shared it. Normally I have that message memorized. I can recite it. I haven't taken the time to memorize it for this devotion, so I'll just be reading it to you. But I want to share this message with you as we talk about how does it look to be thankful? How does it look to be thankful? What is the right attitude that shows you acknowledge the gifts that you have and receive them with great gratitude? How does it look to be thankful? And in what way shall you live that shows that you realize that nothing you'd have if God hadn't chosen to give? How does it look to be thankful? How do you show that you see that nothing you have is really your own? They're all gifts God has given you free. You have many gifts in your life. You enjoy many each day, but sometimes you take them for granted. And thankfulness you seldom pay. It's like the time the 10 men came with their leprosy. They wanted the good Lord to heal them. Jesus, on us, please have mercy. He told them to go to the priest, and as they went, they were healed. Their skin was made like a newborn. They were happy. This was a big deal. But only one came back to say thank you. Only one came to show some respect, and the one that came back was a Samaritan. This is not the one you'd expect. Where had the other 9 gone, and why didn't they come back to say thank you to Jesus? Should we cut them some slack? Maybe they came back later after they went to the priest. After all, that's what Jesus told them to do. They listened to Jesus at least. But still, they didn't seem thankful. They didn't give Jesus their praise. With thankfulness for Jesus' healing, their voices they didn't raise. Sometimes we don't seem thankful. God's gifts, we take them for granted. Instead of looking to God for our needs, in ourselves our trust is planted. Like the 9 who didn't come back, we receive God's gifts with great glee, but seldom do we run to see Jesus. Seldom do we fall on our knees. It's like the time that God's people wandered the wilderness for years. They were tired, they were thirsty, they were hungry. Their eyes were filled with great tears. God had given them bread from heaven. It sure was amazing stuff, but God's people were tired of this boring old bread. God's gifts just weren't good enough. Another time they wanted water. God told Moses to go to a rock. The people, they cried out in anger, but boy, were they in for a shock. For when Moses hit the rock with his staff, water came gushing out. The people now had plenty to drink, but did they know what this was about? God wanted his people to trust him, to come to him when they had need, to trust that God would always be faithful when they were thirsty or needed to feed. You'd think that God's people would thank him. They'd remember the good that he'd done, but more often than not, they grumbled and complained from rising to setting of sun. Sometimes when it comes to what we have, we are less than satisfied. Instead of hearts filled with thankfulness, sin puffs our hearts up with pride. We know what we like. We know what we want, and what we want is only the best. And compared to what we already have, well, there really is no contest. Too often we look across the fence. Greener grass sits on the other side. And our longing for the things that we do not have, we're not even trying to hide. How does it look to be thankful? The Apostle Paul might have something to say. Maybe he can show us how to give thanks. Maybe he can show us the way. In Philippians, Paul points to Jesus, the giver and source of all peace. Paul tells us not to be anxious, but to Jesus our worries release. And as we bow before Jesus, God's good gifts we come to know. And what should our response be to God's love? Thankfulness we need to show. We're thankful when we are humble, recognizing God as the giver of all, and not giving in to our own sinful pride whenever it comes to call. We're thankful when we acknowledge that whatever God gives is enough, even if it means that we'll struggle and times in our life might be tough. We're thankful when we trust Jesus as the one with the power to save his people. That's us from all trouble, from the devil, from sin, from the grave. We're thankful when we share what we have, when we seek to meet others' needs, when we give for the benefit of others, when our lives are filled with good deeds. And why should we be thankful? What is it that God has done? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's the greatest gift. God has given us his Son, who died on the cross on Friday. His friends' hearts were filled with great gloom, but Sunday morning they were smiling, for they had been to the tomb. The stone rolled away. It was empty. The angel said, "Do not fear. Jesus is risen just as he said. He's alive. He is not here." Today, Jesus lives for you and for me, and because he lives, you will live. And in your life, you'll never have need. All good gifts Jesus comes now to give. Jesus gives his forgiveness. He gives us God's grace, and of course, he gives us life. He also gives us our food and our homes and cars, jobs, our children, our husband or wife. And because Jesus lives, we are thankful. He's the giver of every good gift, and so as we sing in this service, voices of thanks we shall lift. We thank God for all that he gives us. His gifts we won't take for granted. Instead of trusting in ourselves, in Jesus our faith is now planted. Amen. That's the message. I pray God's blessings on your Thanksgiving, whether you are with family and friends or because of COVID you're alone. Know that Christ is with you and be thankful for all that he has given you. Amen.